So, hello everyone. The next session will be a very interesting one. So, we have as next title the 30 minutes performance makeover and how to do the fixes that pay off very fast. We're very delighted to have our next speaker, which is Shane Bishop. He's the creator and developer of the image optimizer. And for the last 14 years, he has been very dedicated to making websites faster. And we're very happy and excited that he's here to share his insights and tips with all of you. So, Shane, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Miranda. I'm excited to be here and share some of these things with you. We definitely see a lot of different advice on the internet these days for how to speed up your site, and especially with page speed insights and GT metrics. Some of the things that we see are not necessarily fixes that pay off fast. They're things that require an advanced developer, and some tools are better about saying, oh yeah, you're going to need a developer for this. Page speed insights, not so much. They give the impression, oh, these are things everyone should do. That's not necessarily the case. And so today I want to focus on the things that I think everyone should be able to do in 30 minutes to an hour. Um, I've been doing it a while, so I can do it quicker, but sometimes it takes that long depending on the site. So without further ado, I will get right into it. All right, so we're going to talk about a few things: page caching, and Gzip compression or Brotli compression, how we can optimize images, a few things in there, how we can optimize our JavaScript, our CSS, and if we have time, we will tackle a couple things that we can do with fonts as well. And if you want to learn more about all the things I'm talking about today, you can dig a little deeper with the link I've got on the screen there. I've got a whole series of blog posts covering all these topics in depth. So when it comes to making a site faster, there are typically three main goals I have in mind. One, make the initial page request as fast as possible. Two, decreasing the size of the resources used on our site. So that's the initial HTML. We've got all of our images, our JavaScript, our CSS, and a lot of times fonts as well. And lastly, making sure nothing is render blocking. That is, specifically, the above the fold part of the page can be displayed without waiting for anything else. You get the HTML, poof, rendered. So that's the goal. So as I'm going through this, I'll be talking about the dev tools in the browser. And so if you're not familiar with those, I highly recommend checking them out. You can get to the dev tools anytime from any web page by just right-clicking on it, click inspect, and you'll see something that looks like the right side of the slide here. A lot of the stuff I'll be talking about will be on the network tab, but we'll talk a little bit about the console tab as well. And you can also run your own performance tests from the performance side. So, all right, so the first asset, if you will, on your site that loads is the HTML. The very first thing a browser does is to get that HTML. So in the interest of making that first request faster, there are a couple things we can do. As I mentioned before, we have page caching and compression. So building the HTML for your site is not unlike building a boat, except for you don't have a physical thing, you have a digital thing that we're building. And there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. Just like in building a boat, it takes a lot of time. And if someone came to the lake and wanted a boat, we wouldn't go build them a boat. We would take them to the boathouse and say, here's a boat we built, right? Well, that's what caching does for HTML. There's all this work that goes on to build an HTML page. We have compiling the PHP, we have running the PHP, we have a lot of database requests going on, and that takes time. And on an average site, that can be anywhere from 3 to 4 seconds. It can be worse, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and God forbid, 30 seconds or more. But more often we see, 3 to 4 seconds. My demo site that I put together while I was working on this took 3.5. So look at that. So if we take that long just to get the HTML, we're fighting a losing battle. So what do? We take that HTML that's been generated and we store it in a cache. We store it to disk so that it can be reused without running a whole bunch of PHP or doing any database queries. On my demo site, it went from that 3.5 seconds to just over 1/10 of a second. And I'll show you that here in a second. There's a couple different ways that we can cache things. Some web hosts offer server-based caching. So hosts like WP Engine, Cloudways, Kinsta, Flywheel, they all have server-based caching. There are a bunch more. A lot of hosts don't have that. And so then we can use a plugin-based cache. And either way, the HTML for each page, like we said, is being stored on disk for future visitors. And sometimes you can use a plugin cache on top of server-based caching, which is something I started doing recently, and it can give you a little bit more flexibility with the cache configuration. It's also, as I just recently found out, exactly how Cloudways works if you use the Breeze plugin alongside their server-based Varnish cache, which you likely should if you're using Cloudways, by the way. So when we implement page caching, it goes from 3.5 seconds to, like I said, just under 1/10 of a second, and we've got 79 milliseconds for that initial page request. So the other thing we can do besides caching is compression. And the three biggest types of compression we can apply to our pages and other resources on our page are Gzip compression, Brotli compression, or ZT standard, or Z standard, abbreviated ZTSD. So to test and see if your host is already doing this compression, which a lot of them are, you can right click on the page, as I mentioned before, and get to the dev tools. And then you click over on the network tab, as we see top left here. And then you'll see a whole list of things that were loaded for your page. And you will probably have to scroll up, maybe not if you have a smaller site, but a lot of times you'll have lots of resources. And so you scroll up, click on the very top one, and then you'll see on the right-hand side the headers that were sent along with that request. And so you want to look for your content encoding header and see, first off, is that present and what does it say for the encoding? So you're looking for either GZ for Gzip, BR for Brotli, or ZTSD for Z standard. If you see that, you're done. Move along. Otherwise, some cache plugins will also add Gzip rules for you, and that's the route I would recommend if your web host can't do it for you, which they should, but if they can't, our own Swiss Performance can do that. WP Rocket does that. WP Optimize as well. Some plugins like Hummingbird will give you the rules, and then you got to copy them into your htaccess file. If you have no idea where your htaccess file is, I will go the right direction with the slides and show you. So in the root of your WordPress install, where you have your WP content folder, your WP admin folder, your WP config file, you will often see, if you're on Lightspeed or Apache, again, you'll see a .htaccess file, and you can copy those rules into there, and they will usually look something like this. So what it's doing is just adding the deflate algorithm to all of these file types: JavaScript, JSON, uncompressed fonts. Most fonts are compressed these days, but just in case, your HTML and your CSS, those are the big ones. The HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that you want compressed. So in the end, Gzip compression not only makes the first HTML request faster, but also helps with number 2 on the list, making everything smaller, since, like I said, it applies to JavaScript and CSS as well. Next up, images. Of course, I'm going to talk about images, and in the interest of making things smaller, thing number 2, the next thing we can do is make sure our images are properly compressed. There are plenty of plugins for this, dozens probably at this point, but the top 3 I recommend are our own EWWW Image Optimizer, Imagify, and ShortPixel. They have the best compression to savings ratio. And those are the ones I have used and think work pretty well. So for a long time, most image optimization plugins focused on compressing your local images, and all of these and more will fill that role just fine. You install a plugin, you run a bulk optimization process, and we move on, right? But these days, there's a lot more we can do with our images and even some things we can do pretty quickly. The next thing that I recommend is lazy loading your images, and it should be quick because it's built into WordPress now. Hooray! But there are some cases where you might want a plugin, right? So the first one is if you're using CSS background images, those cannot be loaded by browser native lazy loading that WordPress uses. So a plugin can load those. And the second reason would be if you want your images to be even lazier. So fewer images to load equals more speed. If we look at browser native lazy loading, they use, and lazy load plugins as well do this, they use a threshold below the viewport of how many images they're going to load, because you don't want your user scrolling and then seeing blank spaces where your images should be, right? Browsers used to be worse at this. They've gotten better, but it's still pretty aggressive. They'll load up to 2,500 pixels below the screen. So that's an additional typically 2.5 pages worth of images that they're loading. Plugins, on the other hand, I know ours for sure loads one more screen of images, about 1,000 pixels. So I think that's a nice middle ground, and so that's why I use a plugin, among other reasons. But that's beyond the scope of my talk for today. But background images and being less aggressive with the preloading of images off the viewport are the two big ones I would that come to mind. And when it comes to background images, Image Optimizer and WP Rocket are the two best options that I'm aware of, since they both support background images loading from external CSS files, which is a tricky thing to do. But both of those will do that. And if you know of another one, feel free to drop it in the comments for everyone else to be aware of that. That would be good. All right, so either way, whether you're using browser native or a plugin, just make sure your images are properly compressed and make sure all of them are actually lazy loaded. And on the topic of compression, there's one last thing I think most sites should do because it's free, which is to convert images to a format like WebP or AVIF. This can shave an additional 25% off your images, possibly more with AVIF, which is definitely nothing to sneeze at. We can convert any PNG or JPEG image to WebP with any of the three plugins I mentioned, Imagify, ShortPixel, and our Image Optimizer. And that's done usually with just a bulk optimization. You turn on the WebP option, WebP conversion, run the bulk tool, and boom, you've got WebP copies of all your images. The last step to that is turning on a delivery method. In Imagify, they have server-based rewriting, which we also have, which is the best if you can use that. But then there's a picture-based mode that both plugins have, and we also have a JavaScript-based one, which integrates with the lazy loading. If you're going to lazy load your images, you can also use it to conditionally load WebP. So it's pretty slick for that. However, now that I've said all that with WebP and image compression, there are several CDN-based image optimization options, which can make this whole process even faster and even more of a quick and fast fix. In our plugin, we have the aptly named, creatively named, Easy Image Optimizer CDN. ShortPixel has what they call adaptive images, or ShortPixel AI. And another popular option is Optimoli from the folks over at ThemeIsle. Generally with these, you turn them on, they automatically rewrite your image URLs on the fly, and you really are done. All the image optimization is done without altering a single local image, and this method gives you some cool superpowers too. If you don't like the default quality level, or you decide you don't want WebP or you want AVIF, you can change those things quickly and it applies to every single image instantly. Super cool. Next up, we have our JavaScript. So we have a couple things we can do towards our goals here. First of all, we can compress it, like we said before, with Gzip or Brotli. We can also minify it so that it looks something like this and is completely unreadable by humans. So basically what we're doing, we're stripping out all the extra white space. And depending on the minifier, if you're doing it kind of pre-production, it'll rename functions, it'll rename variables, and into a lot of times things with one letter names, like you'll see in this example. Kind of post optimizers, like you'll see in plugins that do minification, will mostly just be doing white space removal because they don't want to blow up and break your JavaScript, not knowing which variables need to stay and which ones can be modified. And then the third thing we can do with our JavaScript is we can defer it. So backing up just a hair, there's a lot of plugins that do minification, so just pick one. Most of them are, pretty solid on that side of things. Most plugins and themes will already have their JavaScript minified, but if you do happen to have some unminified, like I ran into on my demo site that I was testing, like I said, there are plenty of options. Auto-optimize, our Swiss performance, and perf matters are just a few examples. But yeah, so back to render blocking, this is a really big one. And that is, does the browser have to run any JavaScript before it can render the page? We want the answer to be no, but on most sites, the answer is yes. So we need to defer or delay that JavaScript. And let's talk, I might have gone too far. Yes, I did. Sorry. So deferring runs the JavaScript automatically after rendering. Delay mode runs it after the user interacts with the page. So if they click on the page, if they start scrolling, those sorts of things will trigger delayed JavaScript loading. I don't recommend doing all of it in delay mode. I like a mix where we defer everything, and then if there's things that are completely non-essential to the page, like things that happen in the background or can happen later on, like we have a form in the footer of our web page, that definitely doesn't need to load right away. So we delay that instead of just deferring. And so that gives us even more of a speed boost. It prevents resource contention when we're loading all of our JavaScript. So in theory, we just use a plugin to add a defer attribute to all our scripts, but it can be a tricky thing to get right depending on your site. The main thing to watch out for is JavaScript errors from inline scripts. And that's the slide I was on before. JavaScript errors are not pretty and not always fun to figure out what's going on. So if you're deferring JavaScript, definitely look out for this. Check it before you defer anything, just to make sure you didn't already have JavaScript errors that weren't a big deal. You might have something that isn't needed for a given page, and so whatever it needs isn't there, and it throws in an error and says, hey, I can't do this. Not a big deal. Most JavaScript errors you should probably sort out, but every once in a while, there are those that are not critical. But then again, after you defer, check for errors and get rid of those. Make sure everything is working correctly when you defer. And the biggest thing that we run into, as I think alluded to a little bit, is with inline script sections. A lot of times those will rely on external JavaScript resources. And so if you don't defer the inline stuff and you do defer the external, as soon as the inline script goes to run, it goes, I don't have my friend that I need to run. And it throws an error. Some plugins will take care of that by deferring inline scripts as well. We do that with Swiss Performance. I believe WP Rocket does that, and I honestly don't know of any other plugins that do that. There might be some, and again, you can drop a comment in the chat section there if you know of a plugin that defers inline scripts as well, because that's a great win for not causing these sorts of errors. It can be tricky though, because there are a lot of creative developers out there, we'll call them, and we just fixed yet another quirk with deferring JavaScript in Swiss Performance last week even. So always learning something new and finding some new way people are doing things and breaking JavaScript. So when it comes to CSS, we have a little bit of the same, but with a bit of a twist. Of course, we have our compression, which should already be done at this point. We can minify our CSS, which often is going to be done with the same plugin we used for JavaScript, and then preventing it from render blocking. See, there's a problem. We can't render a page without CSS. So there's a bit of a dilemma. If we defer all of our CSS to prevent it from render blocking, we'll get a pretty ugly page. It'll look something like this, where there's no CSS, no styling, nothing. Now, it's not forever. It's usually just for a second or half a second. And we call this a flash of unstyled content. And it's not great for user experience. It causes layout shifts and all sorts of that. I believe Amber talked a little bit in the accessibility section. So definitely something we want to avoid. But how do we do that? So what we can do to avoid a flash of unstyled content is either generate critical CSS, which is the styling we need for the above the fold section, all the part of the page that's on the screen, or we can use a method that WP Rocket has, which is to remove all unused CSS and take just the used stuff for that page and dump it inline into the HTML. The only downside is that then none of your CSS is cacheable by the browser, so every single page needs its own CSS generated uniquely. It causes the page weight to go up a little bit, not substantially usually, but a little bit. And of course that depends on the complexity of the page. But because of that, because of the caching issues, I prefer generating critical CSS so that we're just inlining a little bit of CSS. And that's what we do in Swiss Performance. But ultimately, either one will get the job done. You just do need to watch out for any CSS that is kind of for hidden elements, like if you have a hover menu or some other stuff on the page that is revealed through user interaction, the styling for that might get missed when you're doing the remove unused CSS. So you might have to whitelist that or exclude that from a feature like WP Rocket is using. And how are we doing on time? All right, I think we got time for fonts. So a couple quick fixes for fonts. There's usually, if you're using the WAF2 format or WAF, I think there's another one, maybe it's just those two. Those two are already compressed. Effectively, they're basically using Gzip for fonts. There's a little bit more to the WAF format than that, but that's the long and short version of it. But when we have fonts, we can also get another acronym, which is a flash of unstyled text, a FOUT, F-O-U-T. And so to help prevent that, and again, improve our user experience, not necessarily a speed issue, but a experience issue, we can preload 1 to 2 of the top fonts that we're using. Specifically, we want the ones that are being used in our above the fold stuff. And again, I would limit to no more than 2. And you can do that with plugins like Swiss Performance. WP Rocket might do it. I know Perf Matters has preloading, and I'm sure lots of other performance plugins have that as well. The other thing that we can do with fonts, especially Google fonts, is to inline the CSS. So especially with Google fonts, they have traditionally loaded the CSS from one domain, fonts.googleapis.com, and then they load the fonts from another domain, fonts.gstatic.com, and that sounds innocuous enough, but it also causes extra HTTP requests and extra DNS lookups. So in the interest of expediting the font delivery, plugins like Swiss and OMGF, Optimize My Google Fonts, can inline that CSS, and then the only request that needs to happen is for the external font file itself. And not surprisingly, if you're using a WordPress block theme, that's what they already do. They locally host the fonts, and they inline the CSS right in the HTML, so that way there's no external requests for the font CSS. All you got is the font files, and you're good. And Swiss will also give you the option if you want to locally host for privacy. I think that's kind of a no-brainer because there are no performance benefits anymore to using this idea of, oh, I use Google Fonts, and so every site that uses it has it cached already. Well, nope, they killed that because of security reasons. So now every site has to load its own fonts, whether you're loading them from Google or your own server. So that's all I've got. And so we've got time for questions. And I will.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation. Very good insights, a lot of tools to basically try out and explore them. So when we have a couple of questions to look into. So first, the question of Eric. He was asking, where do you see the defer and delay errors?
Like if there's JavaScript errors, I'm assuming, those would be right click on the page. Oh yeah, I didn't specifically say that, but that's in the developer tools. Right click on the page, click inspect, and go over to the console section. The console is where you will see JavaScript errors. And like I said, it can be a little bit tricky to diagnose sometimes because you might be seeing the trickle down effect of something else that's being deferred. So a cool thing that we have in Swiss is we have a front end menu that lets you see the dependencies of different scripts. So you can say, hey, I've got an error with this script. You can look it up in the Swiss control panel and see, oh, it requires this script and this script. And so excluding one of those might be what you need. Is those dependencies is what it needs for it to work properly.
Thank you. Another question of Fernando. Should images always be converted automatically by plugins, or is manual optimization still better?
Manual optimization, I'm guessing like pre-upload to WordPress. You can do that, and definitely not a problem with doing that. I've gotten kind of lazy because I have a plugin that does it for me. So it's like, why go through the hassle of doing it manually when you can just have a plugin do it? The other side of that is when WordPress generates thumbnails, you're more likely to be loading those on a browser than you are to load the original full-sized image. And those definitely need to be optimized, and WordPress cannot optimize them by default. It's just a limitation to the way ImageMagick and GD work. They optimize for speed. They don't use the best compression. Even losslessly, you can usually get savings out of those thumbnails. So I always recommend using a plugin for that reason, because of the thumbnails. Not just the little thumbnail, but you know, we've got the medium size, the large size. There's a 1500 now and a 2000. They're all over the map. So.
And specifically a question around your plugin. So can eWWW Image Optimizer API be used to automatically convert images to modern formats like WebP or AVIF during during optimization?
Yeah. With the EU Image Optimizer, we actually have it set up that WebP can be generated for free, whether that's locally on your server. So if your server has ImageMagick, or it can work with GD, but some servers have really old versions of GD that don't work with WebP very well. But especially if you got ImageMagick enabled on your server, you can do it all locally. You don't even need a third-party API. But if you're stuck in this weird middle ground where you can't even do that, we allow free, and it's just built in, it just works, free access to our API to generate WebP images. And then, of course, for our paid customers, we have both WebP and AVIF on the CDN side of things. So it's just automatic. You turn it on and poof, you've got WebP images loaded on your site.
Great to hear. And what are basically the common mistakes when what people make when they are optimizing images in WordPress?
I don't know how common this is, but I think there's a kind of a misleading advice when Google tells us to not lazy load our above the fold images or our LCP image. And so one thing you got to watch out for is are those images being properly scaled? So it's easy to overlook that you might have an image that's displayed at, say 300 by 400 or whatever, and you uploaded a 1200 pixel image. Well, that's 3 times bigger than it needs to be. And in 2D, that's actually about 9 times larger than it needs to be. So that's not good for performance. And if you don't lazy load that, there's nothing our plugin can do to help. And so that's one of the things that I kind of alluded to, but I said, well, that's kind of outside the scope. But we have an automatic scaling option built into our lazy loader that will allow it to properly scale those images for you. So that's kind of a trade-off. If you don't want to lazy load those images, then make sure they're properly scaled. If you don't want to waste time with properly scaling them, and honestly, it took me probably 2 hours to, and I'm kind of OCD about it, but it took about 2 hours just to get one image on our homepage properly scaled and build the responsive markup and make sure it was just perfect. Yeah, like I said, little OCD there, but it can take some time.
Oh,
So if you don't have that time, just let a plugin do it and don't worry about it.
and maybe also related to that one, but more related to the CSS. So, do CMS optimization plugins actually help performance, or can they sometimes create more problems?
Could they create more problems? One example that I kind of talked about is with delaying JavaScript. I think that has the potential to create problems because you've pushed all of the JavaScript to a single action. As soon as the user clicks on the page or starts to scroll, boom, it starts doing stuff. And now the browser's busy doing that stuff. And if they click on something or try to, or if they hover, none of that's happening because it's busy executing the JavaScript that you said to wait until user interaction. So I think that's one area that we can kind of shoot ourselves in the foot and go, whoops. But we don't know it because the speed test will go, oh yeah, you're cool. There's no JavaScript on the page. Well, there is. It's just not loading right away. Yeah, I forgot what it was already. There was something with the last that I wanted to add, but oh well, maybe it'll come back to me.
Good, good. I'll do two more questions. So, in your opinion, which image format is currently providing the best balance between quality and performance?
Oh, I think still, as far as like if you want the ultimate quality, JPEG is probably still kind of the king there. But for balance, I would go with WebP. AVIF is pretty solid, but not the big thing with AVIF that drives me crazy is the performance implications of it. It is super slow to compress and super CPU intensive, to the tune of like 10 times more than WebP. It's pretty bad. So we have to put some really big guardrails on our AVIF compression on the CDN just to make sure it doesn't overwhelm servers and stuff. So.
Okay, and then the last question. So, basically, in which quick optimization techniques are usually giving the biggest speed improvements with the least effort? So basically, how can we get the largest reach with the minimum time?
Page caching is definitely I think, top of the list. Like we saw, going from 3 to 4 seconds or worse to under a second is just fantastic. Compressing images doesn't help as much as it used to because of lazy loading. So lazy loading, of course, is a big win. And like I said, if you're using WordPress, that's built in, awesome, fantastic. Just make sure it's actually getting all of your images. And then on the render blocking side, I would probably lean towards the JavaScript because it's easier to deal with. You don't have to generate the, critical CSS takes some time to generate. And then if you muck around a whole bunch with your homepage, you got to regenerate it, which doesn't take forever, but it's just one more thing to remember. So I would probably say those three: page caching, lazy load, and deferring JavaScript.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your insights.
You would just always compress everything with Gzip and minify all the things just because it's kind of a no-brainer.
Thank you. And so thank you for the very much insights. And we go very soon to the next presentation, which is why good enough performance is no longer good enough. So stay tuned.
Thanks, everyone.